Hello, everyone. This is my Think Aloud for Chapter 5 of 1984. Every so often in a book of this size, I'd say you should go back and make sure you remember what happened over the last few chapters. In a book like this, I'd say every 4 or 5 chapters, you should recollect on what's happened and make sure you have things together, especially if you're not reading the book each day and you're only reading once a week or once every time we have class. If it's really not fresh on your mind, you really should just go look up some summaries or scroll back in the text and find out what happened. So, for our purposes, some of the major things that has happened is we know that our main central protagonist is Winston Smith. We know that this is a dystopian work that is supposed to be in the future. We have seen some fancy technology, although to us, it seems like it's technology that we actually have now. They have things like a telescreen, which apparently can watch every move that a person makes. But Winston Smith found one corner of his room in which, if he's quiet, he can do essentially anything he wants without being caught. And he has decided to get a journal, which he shouldn't have gotten from a shop that he did, and he's writing in it. Starts off innocent enough. We saw some violence, though, in something that he remembered after watching a movie, which happened to be a wartime movie. And we know that he is paranoid that he's going to get caught now because of the thought police that we still don't know everything about, but apparently it seems like they can read into his thoughts a little bit and kind of understand if he's done something wrong. We've met some of his neighbors, including the children. He's deathly afraid of children because he believes that children can oust the parent at any moment. And he's also suspicious of O'Brien, one of the people that he works for and is higher up in his party, as potentially being a person that can go against Big Brother. We know that Big Brother is this huge tyrant like figure in this book who seems to be the antagonist right now, but we'll see if somebody else comes out. There was also that woman that he was fascinated on and had some very evil thoughts about as well that seems very conflicting, and we don't know too much about that. And we know chapter 4 ended somewhat comically with him finally being able to touch his toes for the first time in 7 years after this exercise regime that the government essentially mandates everybody to do. And he's not a frontline soldier, so she's saying, "Oh, you know what? If they're over at the front lines, the least we can do is keep our bodies in tip-top shape and be able to touch our toes." And chapter 4 ends with him being able to do it the first time ever. Might have been an act of defiance, who knows? But certainly Winston Smith is a person that does not seem to like Big Brother, but he's caught in this quandary because can't really say anything about it without potentially getting killed or thrown in prison. So we start chapter 5, Think Aloud. We start off in the low ceilinged canteen. Deep underground, the lunch queue jerked slowly forward. The room was already very full and deafeningly noisy, which is an oxymoron, we know, right? It can't be deafening, right? Deafening would be no noise, and yet it is like when you say the silence is deafening, right? That would fit more than here, but this is deafeningly noisy, which is like it's just so noisy that it just kind of makes you numb to every other sound around. From the grill at the counter, the steam of stew came pouring forth with a sour metallic smell which did not quite overcome the fuse of victory gin. So we have seen this idea, this thing of victory gin quite a few times popping up. Now we know gin is an alcoholic drink. They're naming it Victory Gin. It seems like it's a brand that they have, but it almost seems like that's all these people are drinking. So I don't know what's going on there, but it is something that I am noticing that I definitely want to find an answer to of how often is this Victory Gin going to be coming up? Because we've known that Winston has been drinking it as well, and it just keeps coming up, and it's only in chapter 5, so we're only 50, 60 pages into this book. We still have a few hundred more to go, and we've seen Victory Gin quite a number of times. So repetition is important in a work. We need to understand why are they naming it Victory Gin, number one. So I'm going to write that down. Why name it this? That's not a question mark. handwriting's terrible on this. Whoa, Grammarly's coming up. So why name it Victory Gin? And what's the significance of it being gin, right? So I'm going to circle that differently. Why an alcoholic drink here? We know that the idea behind alcohol is that it's desensitizing. It can be a depressant. It usually has some negative connotations. I'm often picturing, especially in a dystopian work, people are just so depressed that they're just drinking alcohol at a bar all the time. And here it almost has a prison-like feel to it, right? They're in a deep underground place where there's a lunch queue. It's low ceilinged. All they're getting is a steam of stew, sour metallic smell, right? So this isn't a very good place. On the far side of the room there was a small bar, a mere hole in the wall, where gin could be bought at 10 cents the large nip. I'm not sure what that means at all. It might be something specific to England. I'm not sure. But here's that gin again. So people are really liking to buy this gin. Just the man I was looking for, said a voice at Winston's back. He turned round. It was his friend Sim, I don't know how to say it, but there you go, who worked in the research department. Perhaps friend was not exactly the right word. So we know that they're going to be an acquaintance. We're going to wonder why is friend not exactly the right word. We're probably going to be told, but his friend works for a research department. So we've known that this government is very tyrannical and has a bunch of different parts to their government, and there's different jobs. And we learned about the memory hole that Winston is apparently a part of, and he can craft different identities. We know that he is in charge of basically destroying letters, but also rewriting some previous speeches and kind of fixing stuff. But now we're also learning of a research department. So I'm wondering what they're researching, especially if this isn't a place that truth seems to be at the forefront of people's minds. What exactly are they researching? And I can't imagine it could be anything good. And since everything seems backwards in this society, I'm wondering if research department here is really going to be like researching their own citizens to find out who's doing something wrong, maybe something like that. Which means if I'm Winston right now, if this is true and the research department means that, I am freaking out. You did not have friends nowadays, you had comrades. But there were some comrades whose society was pleasanter than that of others. Syme was a philologist, a specialist in newspeak. All right, so he studies languages, but specifically he's studying their made-up weird language. Indeed, he was one of the enormous team of experts now engaged in compiling the 11th edition of the Newspeak Dictionary. He was a tiny creature, smaller than Winston, with dark hair and large, protuberant eyes. Seems like it could be like a bug. At once mournful and derisive, which seemed to search your face closely while he was speaking to you. That might be important because if Winston feels any bit of guilt, if this guy's that observant, maybe he's going to be found out by him. So I'm going to write observant there. I wanted to ask you whether you'd got any razor blades, he said. Not one, said Winston with a sort of guilty haste. So my immediate assumption is correct. Like, he does seem to be guilty, and he's saying something out of guilty haste, right? Very quickly, and you can see that he's saying it very emphatically. But I'm also confused as to why he's doing that about razor blades. It might be because he's already feeling guilty. I've tried all over the place. They don't exist any longer. Everyone kept asking you for razor blades. Actually, he had 2 unused ones, which he was hoarding up. So clearly he lied. So, and I wonder, what is the deal with razor blades? Why are people so bent on getting them? We saw this early on in the book as well. It mentioned this, and now it seems to be coming back. There had been a famine for them for months past. So they clearly know what it is, and it's something that they usually use. Why is there a famine? That's what I'm wondering. At any given moment, there was some necessary article which the party shops were unable to supply. Sometimes it was buttons. Sometimes it was darning wool. Sometimes it was shoelaces. At present, it was razor blades. Why, if this government is in charge of everything, why are there shortages? So I'm going to say there should not be shortages. And if you can't read that, that's okay. I understand what I said. Plus, I just narrated it for you. So suck it up. You could only get hold of them, if at all, by scrounging more or less furtively on the free market. The free market, put in quotation marks, seems kind of sarcastic here. I'm also wondering if the free market to them is considered the black market. We know that this was discussed a little bit with the journal. There's some shops that he shouldn't go into, but it doesn't seem like they're straight out outlawed. Like, why would the government even allow those shops to exist? Why would the government allow places to get razor blades? I've been using the same blade for 6 weeks, he added untruthfully. The queue gave another jerk forward. As they halted, he turned and faced Syme again. Each of them took a greasy metal tray from a pile at the end of the counter. Did you go and see the prisoners hanged yesterday? Said Syme. I was working, said Winston indifferently. I shall see it on the flicks, I suppose. So apparently, I mean, their movies are hanging, and that might be similar to the first movie that we heard of, which was in Winston's first diary entry. It seemed like a wartime flick, but it seemed like it was actually happening over the war that these people are actually currently in against people that are opposite of Big Brother. And so it almost seems like their movies are real time events. Like, I wonder if they actually have any entertainment apart from these propagandizing films that are being made for people. Like, do they have an entertainment Hollywood district, or is it everything based kind of around the news and documentaries? A very inadequate substitute, said Syme. His mocking eyes roved over Winston's face. So this is the second time we're seeing that this character is peering straight into Winston's face. And so Winston is probably, I'm imagining Winston is feeling a little nervous because he knows that he's a little guilty right now. His feelings have exacerbated against Big Brother, and now this person's talking about a hanging of people that have been traitors, and this guy just keeps looking at him. I know you, the eyes seem to say. I wonder if that's true, though. Is this going to end up being a good thing? I see through you. I know very well why you didn't go to see the prisoners hanged. In an intellectual way, Syme was venomously orthodox. He would talk with a disagreeable, gloating satisfaction of helicopter raids on enemy villages and trials and confessions of thought criminals, the executions in the cellars of the Ministry of Love. I mean, that's weird. We knew that the Ministry of Love is a weird place, but it's a place where apparently they execute people. Seems bad. Talking to him was largely a matter of getting him away from such subjects and entangling him, if possible, in the technicalities of newspeak, on which he was authoritative and interesting. Winston turned his head a little aside to avoid the scrutiny of the large, dark eyes. So Winston's feeling the heat here. He's trying to look away. He's trying to look away. And we have to ask ourselves, why didn't he go and see the hanging? Because it seems to suggest up here he's worried that the eyes of Syme here know the truth. And I think he didn't go because he doesn't like it. It was a good hanging. I don't think I've ever hear those words, right? It was a good hanging. That's just wrong. I'm going to do a little frown face, said Syme reminiscently. I think it spoils it when they tie their feet together. I like to see them kicking. Oh my goodness, this dude is sick. This is a very violent society. We've already seen of violence where they're showing kids these things, and this is how these children are being bred in this society. And now he's saying that he likes to see them kicking when they're hung. And above all, at the end, the tongue sticking right out and blue, a quite bright blue. That's the detail that appeals to me. This is like, if somebody said that today to anybody, they're like getting certified as being insane. They're going to mental asylum. Like, this isn't normal stuff to be saying, and I think that this is pretty telling for this society. And Winston probably hates this right now. And he's at this crossroads because he needs to appear like he likes this stuff too. He can't just avoid everything. He needs to try to blend in. I mean, imagine if you're him in this situation. Do you yell at Syme and say, "How could you?" No, because then you are likely going to be the next person that could be hung as a traitor, as a thought criminal, which they're just talking about. So imagine if you were a thought criminal, like Winston technically is, since he did something wrong, and now one of your friends, so called friends, are talking about how good of a hanging something was for somebody doing a crime that might have been very similar to the one that you did. Right? So Winston is in a very difficult and precarious situation here. And so that's my think aloud for the start of chapter 5. I like the way that this chapter is starting out in a noisy lunchroom that just seems very prison like, and it's just him and a friend getting together and kind of talking about just a random conversation that they would have on a normal day, but Winston feels super guilty. And so the author's clearly making us feel that as well, with Syme's eyes roving over Winston's face constantly, trying to search for something and see. And so we're definitely supposed to be a little bit nervous for Winston in this regard. So enjoy the rest of chapter 5. Do your own think aloud, and I look forward to hearing them.